A sergeant at the law, who paid his calls wary and wise for clients at St. Paul's, there also was of noted excellence. Discreet he was, a man to reverence, or so he seemed, his sayings were so wise. He often had been justice of assize by letters patent and in full commission. His fame and learning and his high position had won him many a robe and many a fee. There was no such conveyancer as he. All was fee simple to his strong digestion. Not one conveyance could be called in question. Nowhere there was so busy a man as he, but was less busy than he seemed to be. He knew of every judgment, case, and crime recorded ever since King William's time. He could dictate defences or draft deeds. No one could pinch a comma from his screeds, and he knew every statute off by rote. He wore a homely party-coloured coat, girt with a silken belt of pinstripe stuff. Of his appearance I have said enough. There was a Franklin with him, it appeared. White as a daisy petal was his beard. A sanguine man, high-coloured and benign, he loved a morning sop of cake in wine. He lived for pleasure, and had always done, for he was Epicurus's very son, in whose opinion sensual delight was the one true felicity in sight. As noted as St. Julian was for bounty, he made his household free to all the county. His bread, his ale were the finest of the fine, and no one had a better stock of wine. His house was never short of bake-meat pies, of fish and flesh, and these in such supplies it positively snowed with meat and drink, and all the dainties that a man could think. According to the seasons of the year, changes of dish were ordered to appear. He kept fat partridges in coops beyond. Many a bream and pike were in his pond. Woe to the cook whose sauces had no sting, or who was unprepared in anything. And in his hall a table stood arrayed and ready all day long, with places laid. As justice at the sessions none stood higher. He often had been member for the shire. A dagger and a little purse of silk hung at his girdle, white as morning milk. As sheriff he checked audit every entry. He was a model among landed gentry. A haberdasher, a dyer, a carpenter, a weaver, and a carpet-maker were among our ranks, all in the livery of one impressive guild fraternity. They were so trim and fresh, their gear would pass for new. Their knives were not tricked out with brass, but wrought with purest silver, which avouches a like display on girdles and on pouches. Each seemed a worthy burgess, fit to grace a guild hall with a seat upon the dais. Their wisdom would have justified a plan to make each one of them an alderman. They had the capital and revenue. Besides, their wives declared it was their due. And if they did not think so, then they ought. To be called madam is a glorious thought. And so is going to church, and being seen having your mantle carried like a queen. They had a cook with them who stood alone for boiling chicken with a marrow bone, sharp flavouring powder, and a spice for savour. He could distinguish London ale by flavour, and he could roast and seethe and broil and fry, make good thick soup, and bake a tasty pie. But what a pity, so it seemed to me, that he should have an ulcer on his knee. As for blancmange, he made it with the best. There was a skipper hailing from far west. He came from Dartmouth, so I understood. He rode a farmer's horse as best he could, in a woolen gown that reached his knee. A dagger on a lanyard falling free hung from his neck, under his arm and down. The summer heat had tanned his colour brown, and certainly he was an excellent fellow. Many a draught of vintage, red and yellow, he'd drawn at Bordeaux, while the trader snored. The nicer rules of conscience he ignored. If, when he fought, the enemy vessel sank, he sent his prisoners home. They walked the plank. As for his skill in reckoning his tides, currents, and many another risk besides, moons, harbours, pilots, he had such dispatch that none from Hull to Carthage was his match. Hardy he was, prudent in undertaking. His beard in many a tempest had its shaking. and he knew all the havens as they were, from Gotland to the Cape of Finisterre, and every creek in Brittany and Spain. The barge he owned was called the Magdalene. A doctor, too, emerged as we proceeded. No one alive could talk as well as he did on points of medicine and of surgery. For, being grounded in astronomy, he watched his patient's favourable star and, by his natural magic, knew what are the lucky hours and planetary degrees for making charms and magic effigies. The cause of every malady you'd got he knew, and whether dry, cold, moist, or hot, he knew their seat, their humour and condition. He was a perfect practising physician. These causes being known for what they were, he gave the man his medicine, then and there. All his apothecaries in a tribe were ready with the drugs he would prescribe, and each made money from the other's guile. They had been friendly for a goodish while. He was well versed in Aesculapius, too, and what Hippocrates and Rufus knew, and Dioscorides, now dead and gone, Galen and Rhazes, Harley, Serapion, Averroes, Avicenna, Constantine, Scotch Bernard, John of Gaddesden, Gilbertine. In his own diet he observed some measure. There were no superfluities for pleasure, only digestives, nutritives, and such. He did not read the Bible very much. In blood-red garments, slashed with bluish-grey and lined with taffeta, he rode his way. Yet he was rather close as to expenses, and kept the gold he won in pestilences. Gold stimulates the heart, or so we're told. He therefore had a special love of gold.